There's a specific moment happening right now that you're not consciously aware of. While you're taking in these words, your brain is performing approximately 400 billion actions per second. Neurons firing, synapses connecting, electromagnetic fields pulsing through your skull at measurable frequencies. But here's what neuroscience has only recently begun to understand, and what will completely transform how you experience the next 24 hours of your life. Only about 0.0000001% of that processing ever reaches your conscious awareness, which means right now, as you sit here reading this, your consciousness is making choices about what to observe and what to ignore at a scale that's almost incomprehensible. And every single one of those choices is collapsing quantum possibilities into your experienced reality without you realizing it's happening. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm not using quantum physics as a spiritual metaphor to make manifestations sound more scientific. I'm describing the literal, measurable, documented mechanism through which your observation patterns are selecting which version of reality you experience from the infinite versions that exist in superposition around you right now. What you're about to discover will either reveal the hidden control panel of your reality creation system, or challenge every assumption you've held about how observation shapes existence itself.
Let me show you something that will prove this is happening, whether you believe it or not. Right now, become aware of the pressure of whatever you're sitting or standing on. Before I mentioned it, that sensation existed, but you weren't consciously experiencing it. The nerve signals were firing. The data was being processed, but it wasn't in your awareness. The moment I directed your attention to it, something extraordinary happened at the quantum level of your neural processing. A wave function collapsed. The probability field of all possible sensations you could be aware of right now condensed into one specific experience. The feeling of pressure where your body makes contact with the surface. That collapse didn't happen randomly. It happened because observation occurred. Your consciousness directed attention, and reality responded by manifesting that specific experience out of countless other possible experiences you could have been having in this exact moment. Now here's where it gets disturbing. That same mechanism, that exact same observer-driven collapse of possibility into specific reality, is operating on every level of your experience, every moment of your life. Not just with physical sensations, but with opportunities, relationships, financial outcomes, health conditions, and every single circumstance you encounter. The version of reality you're experiencing right now is not the only version that exists. It's the version your observation patterns have been collapsing into manifestation through mechanisms you've never been taught to recognize, let alone control. In 1978, a physicist named John Wheeler proposed an experiment so disturbing that it fundamentally challenged everything science thought it understood about time, causality, and the nature of reality itself. It's called the delayed choice experiment, and what it proved is still making physicists uncomfortable nearly 50 years later. Wheeler showed that a measurement made in the present moment can retroactively determine what happened in the past, not metaphorically, literally. Particles that had already chosen whether to behave as waves or particles could have that choice changed by an observation made after the fact. The present moment observation collapsed not just current reality, but past reality, rewriting what had already happened based on what was observed. Now, when this experiment was first validated, the physics community went into what can only be described as intellectual crisis. Because if observation in the present can determine what happened in the past, then causality itself, the entire framework of past, causes present, which causes future, is revealed as an illusion created by limited perception. Your consciousness is performing Wheeler's experiment constantly. Every moment you observe your current circumstances, you're not just seeing what is, you're collapsing what was and what will be into specific configurations based on the quality and focus of your observation. Let me make this concrete with something you've experienced but never understood. Think about a time when you were absolutely certain something was going to go wrong, a conversation you were dreading, a situation you were anxious about, an outcome you were convinced would be negative. And then it happened exactly as you feared. Your thinking mind categorized this as, "I knew it," or "my intuition was right," or "I'm just unlucky." But here's what actually occurred at the quantum level of reality creation. Your observation of the future possibility collapsed the probability wave into that specific outcome. Not because you predicted it, because you selected it through sustained, focused observation of that particular timeline from the field of all possible timelines. The universe wasn't confirming your fear. Your fear-based observation was instructing reality about which possibility to manifest from the infinite array of possibilities that existed before your observation collapsed them. Now, I know what your rational mind is doing right now. It's preparing counter-arguments. That's just negative thinking. That's confirmation bias. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy effect. And yes, psychology has names for these patterns. But psychology describes what happens without explaining the mechanism. It tells you that negative thinking produces negative results, but it can't tell you why or how, because it doesn't understand the quantum observation layer where the actual collapse is occurring. But quantum physics can. And when you understand the mechanism, you gain access to something that changes everything. Conscious control over the observation patterns that are currently running on autopilot, collapsing reality in ways you never chose. In the comments, drop one word that represents what you've been unconsciously observing most in your life. Maybe it's lack, maybe it's threat, maybe it's struggle, maybe it's limitation. Let that word be your recognition point for identifying your dominant observation pattern. Your consciousness doesn't observe reality randomly. It operates through 3 distinct observation patterns that were installed during your developmental years and have been running unconsciously ever since. These patterns function like filters, determining what possibilities you're even capable of observing, let alone collapsing into manifestation. The first pattern is called default negative scanning. This is your brain's survival mechanism that evolved to detect threats. In your neural architecture, there's a structure called the amygdala that's constantly scanning your environment for danger, problems, and potential threats. In ancient environments where predators were real and constant, this mechanism kept humans alive. But in modern environments where actual physical threats are rare, this same mechanism has become a reality collapse disaster. Here's how it works. Your amygdala processes information 5 times faster than your conscious awareness. Before you're even aware of what you're observing, your threat detection system has already scanned it, categorized it, and if it finds anything that matches its threat database, it flags that element for conscious attention. This means your consciousness is being directed toward negative possibilities at a rate of 5 to 1 compared to positive or neutral possibilities. And remember, what you observe is what collapses into your experienced reality. If your observation patterns are being automatically directed toward threat, lack, and problem detection 5 times more often than opportunity detection, then guess what version of reality you're collapsing into manifestation moment after moment after moment. Not because the universe is against you, because your observation mechanism is selecting negative probability collapses at an overwhelming ratio. Studies on negativity bias have shown that the human brain registers negative stimuli more quickly, remembers negative experiences more vividly, and weighs negative information more heavily in decision-making than positive information. Scientists thought this was just an interesting quirk of psychology. But when you understand the observer effect, you realize this is actually the mechanism determining which quantum possibilities collapse into your lived experience. You're not experiencing a negative reality because negative things keep happening to you. You're experiencing a negative reality because your observation patterns are predominantly collapsing negative possibilities from the quantum field of all possibilities. The second observation pattern is called confirmation loop observation. Once your consciousness has collapsed a few experiences into a pattern, your brain creates what neuroscientists call a predictive model. This model then determines what you observe going forward. Because your brain is trying to be efficient, it doesn't want to process all information from scratch every moment. It wants to confirm its existing model and move on. This creates a devastating feedback loop at the quantum observation level. Let's say your early experiences collapsed into the pattern people can't be trusted. Your brain creates a predictive model. People are untrustworthy. Now, when you encounter new people, your observation pattern automatically scans for evidence that confirms this model. You notice the one time someone was late, but you don't notice the 10 times they were on time. You remember the friend who betrayed you, but you filter out the friends who've been loyal for years. Your selective observation, based on your predictive model, keeps collapsing the same type of reality over and over again. Not because that's the only reality available, but because that's the only reality your observation pattern is capable of selecting from the quantum field of possibilities. This is why people stay stuck in the same patterns for decades, despite desperate efforts to change. They're trying to change their circumstances without changing their observation patterns. And since circumstances are the collapsed result of observation, trying to change the result without changing the observation mechanism is like trying to change what a radio plays without changing the frequency it's tuned to. The third pattern is the most insidious because it's invisible to the person experiencing it. It's called identity-based observation filter. Your deepest sense of who you are, your core identity, functions as a quantum filter that makes certain observations literally impossible. If your core identity is, I'm someone who struggles financially, your consciousness cannot hold sustained observation on financial abundance. It's that observation of abundance creates such cognitive dissonance with your identity that your brain automatically redirects attention away from those possibilities. The observations that would collapse abundant timelines into manifestation simply cannot be sustained when they contradict identity. This is why affirmations often fail. You're trying to observe a reality that your identity filter won't allow you to actually see. You're saying, I am wealthy, while your observation mechanism is automatically scanning for and collapsing evidence of struggle because that's what matches your identity structure. Princeton University's Peer Lab spent 28 years studying how human consciousness affects random number generators. Across millions of trials, they found that human intention could statistically influence supposedly random quantum events. But here's what they also found that barely got mentioned in the published papers. The effect size varied dramatically between participants. Some people could influence the random systems significantly. Others showed no effect at all. And the difference wasn't practice or technique. The difference was identity structure. Participants who had strong identity attachment to being separate from the system showed minimal effect. Participants who experimented with identity fluidity, who could temporarily adopt the identity of being one with the system, showed dramatically larger effects. Your identity is determining which quantum observations you're capable of making, and your observations are determining which reality collapses into manifestation. If you want to change your reality, you don't need new circumstances. You need new observation patterns. And to change observation patterns, you need to understand the mechanism that's currently running them. Before we go deeper, I want to invite you into something real. If you've been sensing that your observation patterns have been unconsciously selecting your reality, if part of you is recognizing that awareness itself is the creative mechanism, hit like if you just had a recognition, and subscribe. Stay connected to this space. Grow with us. We're not just watching content here, we're learning to become conscious observers instead of unconscious pattern replicators. Let's keep discovering together. Let me show you the neural mechanics of how your observation is collapsing reality. because once you see the mechanism, you can start working with it instead of being controlled by it. Your brain uses approximately 20% of your body's energy despite being only 2% of your body weight. That massive energy consumption is going toward one primary function: prediction. Your brain is constantly generating predictions about what's going to happen next based on past patterns, and then it's comparing incoming sensory data against those predictions. Here's the critical part. Your brain doesn't show you raw reality. It shows you the prediction it generated, and only updates that prediction if incoming data strongly contradicts it. This means what you think you're observing as reality is actually your brain's prediction about reality based on past observations. And here's where quantum mechanics enters the picture in ways that neuroscience is only beginning to understand. Those predictions your brain is generating, they're not passive guesses. They're active observation templates that your consciousness is projecting onto the quantum probability field. And the field responds to those templates by collapsing into matching configurations. Research by Dr. Giulio Tononi on integrated information theory suggests that consciousness itself might be a fundamental quantum phenomenon, not just an emergent property of complex neural computation. If Tononi is correct, and mounting evidence suggests he is, then your conscious observation isn't happening inside your skull. Your skull is happening inside your conscious observation field, which extends into and interacts with the quantum probability field around you. When your brain generates a prediction, this conversation is going to be difficult. It's not just preparing your responses. It's projecting an observation template onto the quantum field of all possible conversation outcomes. That template acts like a measurement in quantum physics, collapsing the wave function of all possible conversations into the specific conversation that matches your observation prediction. And then your brain says, "See, I knew it would be difficult," not realizing it just collapsed that specific outcome into manifestation through its predictive observation. There's a specific type of brainwave that appears when this quantum observation collapse is occurring most powerfully. It's called high-amplitude gamma wave activity, oscillating between 40 to 100 Hz, particularly when it appears in synchronized patterns across multiple brain regions simultaneously. Neuroscientist Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin found that Tibetan monks who had spent over 10,000 hours in meditation showed gamma wave activity that was off the charts compared to normal subjects. But here's what's interesting. These monks weren't trying to generate gamma waves. They were practicing a specific type of observation called choiceless awareness, where they observe without categorizing, without predicting, without collapsing observations into familiar patterns. And what Davidson found was that in daily life, these monks experienced dramatically higher rates of synchronicity, opportunity, and positive outcome manifestation than control subjects. Not because they were trying to manifest anything, because their observation patterns had been retrained to interact with the quantum field differently. They had learned to observe without collapsing through habitual patterns. And when you observe without automatic pattern collapse, the quantum field has more freedom to organize into optimal configurations rather than being forced into the limited configurations your predictive brain keeps selecting. In the comments, share one area of your life where you're ready to shift from automatic observation patterns to conscious observation. Maybe it's relationships, maybe it's finances, maybe it's health, maybe it's opportunities. Let this be your declaration that you're willing to work with the observation mechanism consciously. I'm going to give you a specific exercise that will let you verify this mechanism is operating in your own experience. Not belief, not theory. Direct verification through experimentation. For the next 3 hours, I want you to do something that will feel strange and possibly uncomfortable. You're going to consciously observe your observation. Here's how it works. Whatever you're doing for the next 3 hours, periodically notice what you're noticing. Not the content of what you're experiencing, but the pattern of what you're observing within that experience. If you're in a conversation, Don't just have the conversation. Notice what aspects of the person you're automatically observing. Are you observing their words or their tone? Are you observing agreement or threat? Are you observing their actual communication or your prediction about where the communication is going? If you're working on a task, notice what you're observing about the task. Are you observing the difficulty or the progress? Are you observing what's not working or what is working? Are you observing the actual present moment task or your prediction about the future result? If you're checking your bank account, notice what you're observing. Are you observing the number or the feeling the number creates? Are you observing lack or resource? Are you observing current reality or projected future based on current reality? This practice sounds simple, but it's going to reveal something that might shock you. You'll discover that you're not actually observing most of your reality. You're observing your habitual predictions about reality, and those predictions are what's collapsing quantum possibilities into your experienced outcomes. Within the first hour of this practice, you'll catch yourself multiple times observing through pure habit. Your observation will automatically jump to problems, to what's wrong, to what matches your existing patterns. And the moment you catch that automatic observation pattern, something extraordinary happens. The catching itself, the awareness of the observation pattern, creates a quantum gap, a space between the automatic observation and the collapsed reality. And in that gap, other possibilities suddenly become visible that were invisible a moment before. You'll notice opportunities you would have completely missed because they didn't match your predictive observation template. You'll hear information in conversations that you would have filtered out. You'll see solutions that were literally invisible to your pattern-based observation system. This isn't magical thinking. This is the direct experience of how your observation patterns have been limiting which quantum possibilities you're capable of perceiving, let alone collapsing into manifestation. One participant who did this exercise reported something that perfectly captures what happens. He said, "I was in a meeting that I was convinced was going to be contentious based on previous meetings with this group. About 20 minutes in, I remembered to observe my observation, and I realized I had been so focused on looking for the conflict I expected that I had completely missed that two people had made genuinely conciliatory statements. My observation of expected conflict had been collapsing the meeting into conflict by literally making me blind to peace offerings that didn't match my prediction." The moment he shifted his observation pattern, the entire meeting atmosphere shifted. Not because he changed his behavior, because he changed what he was observing, which changed what reality could collapse into manifestation in that space. Now that you understand the mechanism, I'm going to show you how to work with it deliberately. There's a specific state of consciousness that quantum physicists and neuroscientists are both discovering from different directions. Quantum physicists call it coherence. Neuroscientists call it whole brain synchronization. Meditation traditions have called it various names: samadhi, flow state, presence, the gap. But regardless of what it's called, it's describing the same phenomenon. A state where your observation isn't being run by automatic patterns, predictions, or identity filters. It's a state of pure observation where you're witnessing reality without the prediction filter that normally determines what you're allowed to see. And here's what happens in this state that's been documented repeatedly across multiple research domains. When your brain enters whole brain coherence, when gamma waves synchronize across all regions simultaneously, your observation gains the capacity to collapse quantum possibilities that are normally invisible to pattern-based observation. In practical terms, this means solutions appear that weren't there a moment ago, not because they manifested from nothing, but because your observation pattern was finally capable of seeing them in the quantum field of already existing possibilities. Opportunities become visible that your predictive brain had been filtering out. People respond to you differently because your observation of them isn't trapped in predictive patterns, which gives them space to show up differently. The mechanism for entering this coherent state isn't complicated, but it is specific. Your automatic observation patterns are maintained by something neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is the constellation of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on a specific task. It's the network that generates your sense of self, your autobiographical memory, your predictions about future based on past. The default mode network is extraordinarily useful for navigating familiar situations efficiently. But it's also the mechanism that keeps you locked in repetitive observation patterns that collapse the same reality over and over again. To access quantum coherence, you need to temporarily quiet the default mode network, which allows other observation patterns to emerge. And the research shows there are 3 reliable triggers that quiet this network and open coherent observation. First, sustained focus on direct sensory experience in the present moment. Not thinking about experience, but direct attention to the raw data of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching. When you put your full attention on direct sensory input, the default mode network's predictive functions quiet down because there's no gap between experience and prediction. You're in direct contact with what is, rather than what you think is. Second, practices that create momentary confusion of habitual patterns. This is why meditation traditions use koans, paradoxical questions that can't be answered by normal predictive thinking. When your brain encounters something it cannot process through existing patterns, the default mode network briefly suspends operation while it tries to generate a new pattern. In that suspension, coherent observation becomes possible. Third, emotional states that transcend personal identity. When you experience profound gratitude, unconditional love, awe at something vast, or deep connection with something beyond your separate self, the default mode network quiets because these states temporarily dissolve the boundaried self that the network is designed to maintain. Any of these 3 triggers can open the coherent state where your observation patterns become fluid rather than fixed. And in that fluid state, you gain access to quantum collapse capabilities that are impossible from within pattern-based observation. If this message resonates with you, subscribe to stay connected and hit the bell icon to get notified. You're stepping into a space where we explore the quantum mechanics of observation and reality creation. This isn't just a channel, it's a community of conscious observers learning to work with the collapse mechanism. If you felt something shift while watching, you're already beginning to observe your observation. Let's keep exploring together. Remember Wheeler's delayed choice experiment I mentioned earlier? The one that proved observation in the present can change what happened in the past. There's a practical application of this principle that's so powerful, it's going to sound impossible until you test it directly. You can change past observations, which retroactively changes past reality collapses. I'm not talking about memory revision or reframing or psychological techniques. I'm talking about the actual quantum mechanism where present observation collapses past probability waves differently than they were collapsed the first time. Here's how it works in practice. Think of a past experience that you've been carrying as evidence for a limiting belief. Maybe someone criticized you, and you collapsed that observation into "I'm not good enough." Maybe a relationship ended, and you collapsed that into "people always leave." Maybe a business failed, and you collapsed that into "I'm not capable of success." Those observations in the past collapsed the quantum probability of those experiences into specific meanings, specific patterns, specific reality structures that have been determining your observation patterns ever since. But here's what quantum mechanics reveals. Those past observations are not fixed. The meaning, the pattern, the structure you collapsed them into was one possible collapse from a field of multiple possible collapses. And you can reobserve those past experiences from your present moment coherent state, which allows them to collapse into different configurations retroactively. This sounds like science fiction until you understand what's actually happening. The past event itself doesn't change. The quantum information structure around that event, the meaning field that you collapsed it into through your original observation, can be recollapsed into different configurations through new observation. When you reobserve a past experience from a coherent, present state, without the automatic pattern filters that created the original collapse, you often discover information that was there all along but wasn't part of your original observation. You see context you missed. You notice responses you filtered out. You recognize possibilities that your pattern-based observation made invisible. And as those new observations register, the quantum structure of your past literally reorganizes. Not the external events, but the information field those events exist within, which is what actually determines their impact on your present reality. I watched this happen with someone who had spent 20 years believing he was rejected by a parent. That observation had collapsed into an identity of unwanted that had been determining his observation patterns and relationship collapses ever since. During a coherence practice, he reobserved that childhood experience without his habitual pattern filter, and he noticed something he had literally never seen before: his parents' eyes. In the original observation, he had only seen the words and actions of rejection. But reobserving from coherence, he saw his parents' eyes. And in them, he saw terror, confusion, and desperate protection of a wounded child who was doing everything wrong because they had never been taught anything right. That new observation collapsed the past experience into an entirely different configuration. Not from "I was rejected because I'm unworthy" to "my parent was struggling and couldn't show up the way they wanted to." And the moment that retroactive collapse occurred, his present moment identity structure shifted. The unwanted identity that had been determining his observation patterns for 20 years dissolved because the quantum foundation it was built on had been recollapsed into a different structure. Within weeks, his relationship patterns shifted, not because he was trying to change them, but because his observation patterns were no longer being run by an identity of unwanted that was automatically collapsing rejection scenarios from the quantum field of relationship possibilities. This is the power of understanding that observation collapses reality, and that past observations can be recollapsed through present coherent observation. Your history is not fixed. The meaning you collapsed it into is not permanent. You can reobserve and retroactively alter the quantum structures that have been determining your current observation patterns. I'm going to give you a specific protocol that will let you test everything I've shared, not as theory, but as direct, experimental verification in your own experience. This protocol is designed to shift your observation patterns consciously for 48 hours, which is long enough to produce measurable changes in the reality that collapses around you. Phase 1. Morning Observation Reset. For the first 15 minutes after waking, before you check your phone, before you engage with any external information, you're going to consciously set your observation pattern for the day. Lie still with eyes closed. Don't meditate. Don't try to clear your mind. Just notice what your It's probably immediately jumping to concerns, problems, tasks, predictions about the day. That's the default mode network, reasserting your habitual observation pattern. Don't fight it. Just notice it. Each time you notice your observation has been captured by a thought pattern or prediction, simply return attention to direct sensory experience. The feeling of your breath, the sounds in your environment, the sensation of your body against the bed. Do this for 15 minutes. You're not trying to achieve any particular state. You're training your attention to notice when it's been captured by automatic pattern observation and consciously redirecting it to present moment, direct experience. This is building the neural pathway that allows you to catch and redirect automatic observation patterns during your day. Phase 2. Hourly Coherence Check. Set an alarm to go off every hour for the next 48 hours. When it sounds, stop whatever you're doing and spend exactly 90 seconds observing your current observation pattern. What are you noticing about your current experience? Are you observing what's actually happening or what you're predicting will happen? Are you observing problems or possibilities? Are you observing through a filter of past patterns, or are you seeing fresh? Then consciously shift into direct sensory observation for the remaining seconds. Whatever you're doing, Experience it directly without the prediction layer. If you're in a conversation, actually hear the person instead of predicting what they're going to say. If you're working, feel the actual experience of the task instead of observing your judgment about the task. These 90-second coherence checks are interrupting your automatic observation patterns regularly enough that they can't fully reassert control. You're creating gaps in the pattern-based collapse mechanism, which allows different quantum possibilities to become visible and available for manifestation. Phase 3. Evening retroactive collapse. Before sleep, spend 10 minutes reviewing your day. But you're not reviewing what happened. You're reviewing what you observed about what happened. Think about 3 specific moments from your day. For each moment, identify what you automatically observed in that moment. Did you observe threat or opportunity? Did you observe lack or resource? Did you observe problem or solution? Then re-observe each moment from coherence, without your automatic pattern filter. What else was present in that moment that you didn't observe the first time? What possibilities existed that your habitual observation collapsed away from? This isn't about positive reframing or making yourself feel better. This is quantum observation training. You're learning to see the gap between what exists in the probability field and what your automatic patterns allow you to observe. And as you practice seeing that gap, your observation patterns become more flexible, more capable of collapsing different realities than the ones your automatic patterns have been selecting. Phase 4. Identity observation. This is the most advanced phase, but it's where the deepest shifts occur. Once per day, during these 48 hours, spend 5 minutes observing your identity structure directly. Ask yourself, who am I observing myself as being right now? Don't analyze or think about this. Just notice what identity you're currently operating from. Are you the identity of someone who struggles, someone who succeeds, someone who's healing, someone who's broken, someone who's worthy, someone who has to prove themselves? Your identity is the deepest observation filter you have, and most people never consciously observe it. They just operate from it automatically. But when you bring conscious observation to your identity itself, something extraordinary happens. The identity structure, which felt fixed and permanent, reveals itself as another observation pattern, another collapse choice. And if identity is a collapse choice rather than a fixed reality, then you can choose different identity observations, which will fundamentally change what your consciousness is capable of observing and collapsing in external reality. If you actually execute this protocol instead of just reading about it, you're going to notice specific changes that will prove the mechanism is real. Within the first 12 hours, you'll catch yourself multiple times about to collapse into automatic observation patterns, and you'll experience the strange sensation of being able to choose a different observation. It will feel like time briefly slows down, like there's space between what's happening and your response to it. That space is the quantum gap between possibility and collapsed reality. Your rational mind will want to call these coincidences, but you'll start recognizing a pattern. These coincidences appear specifically in domains where you shifted your observation pattern from automatic to conscious. They're not random. They're different possibilities collapsing into manifestation because your observation pattern is finally capable of seeing and selecting them from the quantum field. By hour 36, people will start responding to you differently. Conversations will flow more easily. Conflicts that usually emerge will fail to manifest. Connections will form faster. Your thinking mind will want to credit this to your improved mood or changed behavior. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice something more subtle. People are responding to your different observation of them. When you observe someone without your predictive pattern filter, without collapsing them into your expected version of who they are, they have space to show up differently, and they do. By hour 48, you'll have direct, experiential evidence that your observation patterns have been collapsing specific realities from fields of quantum possibility. And once you know this, through direct experience rather than intellectual concept, you can never fully unknow it. Your relationship with reality permanently shifts because you've seen the mechanism. The 48-hour protocol proves the mechanism is real, but proof alone doesn't create lasting change. Your automatic observation patterns have decades of momentum behind them. They will reassert themselves the moment you stop consciously working with the protocol. This is where most people fail. They have the breakthrough experience. They see the mechanism operating, and then they assume the work is done. They return to automatic observation patterns, and within days or weeks, they're back to collapsing the same reality they've always collapsed. Integration requires something different. It requires building new neural pathways that make coherent observation more automatic than pattern-based observation. And neuroscience has shown exactly how long this takes. Approximately 63 days of consistent practice to establish a new default neural pathway. Which means, if you want your observation patterns to shift from automatic limitation to conscious possibility, you need to continue the core practices from the 48-hour protocol for at least 63 days. Not perfectly, not rigidly, but consistently enough that your brain recognizes this is the new default pattern. The morning observation reset, the hourly coherence checks, the evening retroactive collapse review, the identity observation practice. These aren't temporary techniques. They're training wheels for a completely different way of operating in reality. And like any training wheels, you use them until the new pattern is established, and then they become unnecessary because the new pattern is running automatically. But here's what makes this different from most personal development practices. You're not trying to install new beliefs or new behaviors. You're working with the fundamental mechanism through which consciousness collapses reality. Which means the changes that occur aren't surface level, they're structural. They're operating at the quantum level, where reality is actually being selected and manifested moment by moment. Share this with someone who's been unconsciously running the same observation patterns and wondering why their reality never changes. You know who they are. That friend who keeps attracting the same relationship dynamics. That family member who can't seem to break free from limitation patterns. Make sure you share this video. For you, it may be just sharing, but for someone, it may be the key that unlocks conscious observation. Someone who's ready to discover that reality responds to what you observe, not just what you intend. And their breakthrough will shift the collective observation field we all participate in. Before we go further, I want you to recognize something about this exact moment. You've been reading for a while now. Your automatic observation patterns have been evaluating everything I've shared, categorizing it, comparing it to existing knowledge, deciding whether to believe it or dismiss it. But underneath that automatic processing, something else has been happening. Your deeper consciousness has been recognizing the truth of what's being described, not believing it intellectually, but recognizing it as something you've always known but didn't have language for. You've experienced moments where reality seemed more fluid than normal, where synchronicities multiplied, where solutions appeared from nowhere, where life flowed instead of struggled. And in those moments, something was different about how you were observing. You weren't locked in predictive patterns. You weren't collapsing reality through automatic filters. You were in coherent observation, and reality responded by organizing itself into more optimal configurations. This isn't new information I'm giving you. This is recognition of a mechanism that's been operating your entire life. And now that you can see the mechanism, now that you understand how your observation patterns are determining which quantum possibilities collapse into your experienced reality, you have a choice that most people never realize they have. You can continue letting your automatic patterns observe and collapse reality unconsciously. Or you can learn to work with the mechanism consciously, deliberately, powerfully. The quantum field is always here, always containing infinite possibilities in superposition, always ready to collapse into whatever configuration your observation patterns select. It's not withholding anything from you. You've been withholding it from yourself by operating through observation patterns that can only see and collapse a tiny fraction of what's actually available. I'm going to share what becomes possible when you've spent enough time working with conscious observation that it becomes your default pattern. Not to create expectation or attachment to outcomes, but to show you what you're actually working toward. There's a state that advanced practitioners of this work describe in remarkably similar ways across different traditions and frameworks. They describe reality as becoming responsive, fluid, synchronistic in ways that seem impossible to people operating from automatic observation patterns. Opportunities appear the moment they're needed. Not before, when they'd create overwhelm, and not after, when they'd be useless. The right people show up at the right time with the right information or resources. Solutions to problems emerge from unexpected directions. Obstacles that seem solid suddenly reveal unexpected openings. From the outside, this looks like extraordinary luck or manifestation ability. But from the inside, something entirely different is happening. These practitioners haven't learned to manifest. They've learned to observe without collapsing reality through limiting patterns. And when observation becomes free of limiting patterns, the quantum field has vastly more space to organize into optimal configurations. They're not controlling reality. They're not bending the universe to their will. They've simply removed the observation filters that were preventing reality from organizing naturally into its most coherent, supportive, flowing states. And here's the part that sounds paradoxical until you experience it directly. The less you try to collapse reality into specific outcomes, the more reality collapses into outcomes that exceed what you could have specifically intended. Because your conscious mind, operating from pattern-based observation, can only imagine and intend outcomes that fit within those patterns. But the quantum field, responding to coherent observation without pattern limitation, can organize into configurations that your pattern mind never conceived of as possible. This is why the deepest practice isn't learning to observe specific outcomes more powerfully. It's learning to observe without needing specific outcomes. Trusting that coherent observation allows reality to organize more optimally than your pattern-based observation ever could. You're at the end of this transmission. In a moment, you're going to return to your normal life, your normal activities, your normal reality. And here's what's going to happen. Your automatic observation patterns are going to try to reassert complete control. They're going to categorize everything you've read as interesting information, file it away, and return you to unconscious pattern-based reality collapse. Within hours, you'll be operating exactly as you were before you started reading, collapsing the same reality through the same automatic mechanisms, unless you make a different choice right now. The next 60 seconds are a quantum threshold. What you observe and choose in the next 60 seconds will determine whether this information becomes transformation or just more content you consumed and forgot. If you're ready to actually work with this mechanism, instead of just understanding it intellectually, then commit right now to executing the 48-hour protocol starting tomorrow morning. Not eventually, tomorrow. Because eventually is how your automatic patterns keep you locked in the same collapse patterns forever. Set your alarms now for the hourly coherence checks. Decide now what time you'll wake up to do the morning observation reset. Make the commitment now to the evening retroactive collapse review. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait until you understand everything completely. Your automatic observation patterns will use those delays to prevent you from ever actually starting. The quantum field is not waiting for you to deserve it or earn it or become worthy of it. It's here now, containing infinite possibilities in superposition, ready to collapse into whatever reality your observation patterns select. The only question is whether you'll continue letting automatic patterns make that selection unconsciously, or whether you'll learn to observe consciously and discover what becomes possible when you do. The observer effect isn't just physics. It's the mechanism through which you're creating your reality every moment. And now you know how it works. What you observe in the next 60 seconds will collapse the quantum probability of your future into either the same pattern you've been experiencing or into possibilities that your automatic patterns have been making invisible. Choose your observation carefully. Reality is listening.